If you've ever wanted to make a mason jar tissue holder that actually works and looks professional enough to buy in a boutique, you need to see this. I'll show you my favorite tissue dispenser insert that's so easy. Gorgeous lavender rice paper, clay embellishments, textured stenciling, and every step to create this stunning piece from start to finish. I'm Donna from Mason Creations, etc. Let's make a mess, my friends. You're going to need a 1-quart wide mouth mason jar. The nifty insert I'm going to show you later only fits a wide mouth jar. I'm going to wipe the jar with some alcohol to remove any dirt, oil, or fingerprints. This way I have a nice clean surface to work with. Next, I'm going to give the jar a coat of polyvine multi-surface lacquer in a dead flat finish, which will remove the shine. This creates a bond that keeps paint from chipping and peeling. For best results, I'm going to let this dry overnight. I'm giving my jar a coat of white paint using Dixie Belle Chalk Mineral Paint in the color Cotton. I'm going to be adding a rice paper image on this jar. Make sure you always paint white or a very light off-white wherever you're going to decoupage rice paper or a napkin. White allows the colors of your images to look more vibrant. Dark colors will make your images look dark and muddy. I ended up giving this 2 coats of paint to make sure it was completely opaque. Bear in mind, the first coat of paint you put down is what you'll see from the inside. So if you want a color on the inside, paint that first, and then put white over top of it for your decoupage. I'm avoiding adding paint to the threads of the jars so the lid will screw on properly, but I am painting as close to the threads as I can. If I slip, I'll remove it later. And then I let this dry for about 30 minutes. Just look at this amazing rice paper. I think the colors are just amazing. And Sharon, I know you're loving it. I'm using a water brush to separate the image I'm going to use from the rest of the sheet. A water brush has a cartridge that you fill with water and then brush it on the napkin or rice paper. The water dispenses easily, so this is really convenient. I'm tearing off as much of the white background as I can. Tearing your rice paper creates a feathery edge that's much easier to blend than a sharp cut edge. My crafty friend, Kirsten, wanted to see a project that incorporated decoupage, air dry clay, and stenciling. Kirsten, this video is for you. The jar is slightly rounded at the top and bottom. In order to get the paper to lay flat, I'll need to add some tears at all 4 corners of the image, only about a ½ inch. Instead of bunching up in the corners, the pieces where I tore the image will overlap and lay perfectly flat. I'm going to use Polyvine Heavy Duty Varnish in the satin finish as my decoupage glue today. This is always my go-to for decoupage glue, as well as my final sealer. I like the professional, flawless finish it gives. Once I got the image exactly lined up, I lifted up the edge of the paper and began decoupaging this gorgeous image. Notice how nice and flat those corners are laying down. Even though I tore right through the image, you can't tell at all. Those tears become invisible. If you'd like to learn more about any of the products I'm using today, be sure to visit my website. You'll find a complete materials list for this project in the Weekly Project Supplies tab, with links to all the products I used. I misted a piece of plastic from a cut-up Ziploc bag with some water. I laid it over top of the newly decoupaged image and used a folded-up paper towel to rub out any would-be bubbles or wrinkles, rubbing from the center outward in all directions. Then lifted up the plastic carefully so as not to pull up the rice paper. This is an important step. It presses the paper so tight up against the jar that the paper appears to be part of the jar. And I'll let this dry for a couple hours. The jar is dry now, and I'm adding a coat of my varnish over the image, paying close attention to the edges of the paper. I'm getting ready to do some paint blending, so I need to make sure those edges are sealed. The sealed edges stop the paint from grabbing onto the paper and making the paper edges obvious. And then I'll let that dry for about an hour. It's dry, and I'm going to start blending that gorgeous lavender with the rest of the jar. I'm starting with Pentart paint in the color purple, which is too dark, so I'm going to lighten it up with some Dixie Belle chalk mineral paint in the color Magnolia. It's the exact same tone as the creamy color in the background of the paper. I kept mixing them until the depth of color was right. I added the paint with my brush and then dabbed it with a misted sponge. The water on the sponge helps the paint blend better and gives a slight translucent appearance. I took the paint right over top of the rice paper. This is the secret to perfect paint blending. If the color is slightly off, the two different colors will blend together, creating a third color. Now I'm going to sponge some of the magnolia onto the lavender for a perfect blend. I'm going back and forth with the two colors until I'm happy with the way it looks. I'm keeping my sponge damp at all times. If the paint stops blending well, I add more water. To find my website, just click on my profile picture below the title of this video, which takes you to my YouTube homepage. Then to the right of my picture, you'll see a blue link to my website. Would any of you like to see this tissue dispenser in a Christmas theme? Let me know in the comments. Okay, now for the back. I'm starting off dabbing the lavender paint all over the back. It's looking very blotchy, but once I add the magnolia in, it'll start blending nicely. I have my sponge very wet while I'm doing this part. You can see the watery paint bubbling up. I'll dab that out with a dry portion of my sponge. Most of the featured projects on my YouTube channel also include step-by-step written instructions. Simply head over to my website, open the Discounts and Special Offers tab, scroll down to Written Instructions, then scroll to find the project you're looking for. New project instructions are typically added within a few days of each video's release. I'm using the lavender paint to cover up the white paint up by the threads of the jar. I let the paint dry for about 30 minutes and then gave the entire jar a coat of varnish to protect all my paint. And then I let the varnish dry for an hour. I'm going to do some stenciling now that's going to create some really cool texture. I've sprayed the backside of my stencil with Pixie Spray repositionable stencil adhesive. This will keep products from bleeding under your stencil. After spraying, I let it dry for about 10 minutes. I'm using some painter's tape to hold the two sides down. Since I'm going around the curve of the jar, the adhesive needs a little help. The fact that this stencil is thin and very flexible helped. I'm using Redesign chalk paste in the color Dusty Plum. I'm applying this with my palette knife and just sliding it over the stencil. I'm not going to cover the entire jar. I'm just applying it here and there. I've had this stencil in my stash for a really long time, so it may not be available any longer. But I'm going to leave you a link where you can find some beautiful stencils that will work just as well. I'm lightly pressing down where there are some little points. Make sure you wash your stencil right away. You don't want this to dry on your stencil. It will dry in the crevices, ruining your pattern. I'll let this dry for several hours. I'm using my favorite, Doss clay, to make some embellishments for this project. DOS clay is so easy to work with, dries quickly, and has very little shrinkage or cracking when dry. It's perfect for making molded pieces. After pressing the clay into the mold, I'm scraping off the excess with my palette knife. Then I'll smooth out the clay with some water. I'll put it in the freezer for 20 minutes, or a little longer if the clay is thick. Freezing the clay makes it rigid, so it just pops out of the mold easily. No fragile pieces will break off. I just removed my mold from the freezer. Watch how easily this just pops out of the mold. It's frozen solid, so I'll need to let it thaw for a few minutes, but not in the mold. Make sure you remove the clay from the mold right away as soon as you take it out of the freezer. While they're thawing, I take that time to smooth out the edges and remove any little pieces of clay that shouldn't be there. While they're still somewhat frozen is a great time to do this. They're still hard, so touching them won't destroy all that beautiful detail. They do thaw quickly and will be ready to glue to your project within a few minutes. I'm going to use Aleene's tacky glue to add my molded clay to my piece. I need to add this while the clay is still wet so it'll conform to the piece as it dries. This is the best glue I've found for attaching wet clay. If any glue seeps out from under the clay, I'm removing it right away with a clean, damp brush. I'm also pressing down all the edges of the clay very delicately to make sure they're all connecting with the piece. I must have gotten a little too rough spreading the glue on the dragonfly because I've ripped off her wing. No worries though, I'll just add it separately and it'll look just perfect. At the bottom of the jar, I'm adding some sprigs of lavender and a couple leaves all the way around, and 2 more dragonflies. I put my glue on the back of a silicone mold, and I'm using a silicone makeup brush to apply the glue. This makes for a really easy cleanup, and no artist paintbrushes become destroyed. If you let the remaining glue dry, it just peels right off. I'm using the same Pentart purple to paint all the lavender sprigs, and I used Pentart Country Green for the leaves. It's a really nice muted green that goes well with the purples and lavenders. In a minute, I'm going to do some dry brushing on the lavender to give it some dimension. Stick with me until the end of this video. I'm going to show you the tissue insert that makes this mason jar different from every other one I've seen. It's incredibly simple, it works beautifully, and you don't have to make it. Just insert and you're done. I'm using a light lavender to do some dry brushing on all the lavender sprigs. I'm dipping just the tip of my brush into the paint. I'm wiping most of it off on a paper towel. You want your brush almost completely dry to get the proper effect. I'm skimming just the tip of my brush across the high points on the embellishment. You don't want the paint to go into any of the cracks or crevices, just lightly across the top. Now it's time for the dragonflies. I'm mixing a dark eggplant purple and Pentart dark blue. I'm adding quite a bit of water. I want this paint to go on the wings and have a translucent quality to it. Now I'm mixing Tuscan red, Pentart purple, and some water for the wings as well. I put the dark eggplant blue color on the tips of the wings and blotted it with a dry soft cloth. This way some of the white clay is showing through. I'm adding the purple red color in the center near and including the body. I'm overlapping the paints so they blend together. In many of my videos, you'll see me using a variety of handy little tools that make crafting so much easier. Things like a turquoise cup cradle to keep round objects from rolling away, a bodabra for making beautiful bows in a snap, a water brush for separating rice paper and napkins, and so many other helpful favorites. If you're interested in checking out any of these items, you can find them listed on my website in my favorite supplies section under craft tools. When I was finished, I let the paint dry and then gave the entire jar a coat of varnish to prepare for the antiquing I'm going to do next, and I let that dry for about an hour. I'm going to add a little depth and dimension by doing an antiquing technique. I'm using folk art antiquing medium in the color wooden bucket brown. I put a few drops in a little paper cup and added some water. I prefer my antique mediums somewhat runny. I'm brushing my antique on the piece, going over and around all the embellishments. I'm doing this in sections and wiping the antique off with a soft dry cloth right away before it can dry. Because of the gloss finish, it will wipe off the surface and stay in all the cracks and crevices, showing the details of the mold. Antiquing gives your embellishments some depth and dimension, making everything look 3D instead of flat. What a difference it makes. Everything just comes to life now. I just want to take a moment, all of my crafty friends, to say thank you for watching this video. If you're enjoying the content, it would be great if you could take a quick second and hit the like and hype buttons. I appreciate you for doing that. I have some awesome new projects coming up, so don't forget to subscribe. I'm adding a little antique at the bottom of the jar and at the top under the rim to give it a little bit of a distressed look. I let the antique dry for about an hour, and then I gave the entire jar a final coat of varnish and let that dry for 1 hour. Any paint that happened to get on the threads of the jar came off easily with the scrubby part of a kitchen sponge. If you follow me, you've been waiting to see when the gold shimmer was going to make its entrance. I'm using Finnabair metallic wax rub in the color white gold to give this jar a beautiful glow. I'm putting a small amount of the rub on my finger and rubbing it together with my thumb. Smearing it around like that prevents a large amount of your product ending up in one place. I'm rubbing this lightly over the dragonflies, the lavender, leaves, top and bottom edges of the jar. Where are you all watching from, my crafty friends? Let me know in the comments. I just love to see what cities and countries all my friends are watching from. I'm filming from sunny Las Vegas, Nevada in the United States. Okay, here we go, guys. This little black plastic insert is going to make your life so much easier when making a mason jar tissue dispenser. I'll show you how it works in just a few minutes. First, instead of leaving it black, I'm going to paint it to match the jar. Because it's a non-porous surface, I added some of my multi-surface lacquer and let it dry for a few hours. Then I'm painting it to match the jar. I love that it's going to match instead of staying black. After the paint dried, I added a coat of varnish and let that dry for an hour. When visiting my website, you'll find a special code to save 10% on one order with a minimum of $50. This is from my wonderful sponsor, decoupagenapkins.com. Just for watching this video. Once on my website, click on the Discounts and Special Offers tab. Okay, watch how easy this is. No cutting out felt and no cutting out cardboard. I'm removing the sealing disc and adding my insert into the threaded screw band. You can get tissue refills, and I'll leave you a link. Just remove the tissues from the plastic and place them in the jar lengthwise. Pull up the first tissue and thread it through the hole in the plastic insert and screw the lid on. Yes, it's that easy. Now, I'm sure you want to know what this fancy schmancy insert is. It's a mason jar plant growing lid. It holds the stems of cuttings in the center of the jar for rooting. But today it's a tissue dispenser. Don't worry, I'll be leaving you a link with all my project supply links on my website. So tell me in the comments what you think about this awesome little insert. Would you use it? Do you plan on trying this project? If you enjoy learning little tricks and techniques that make crafting easier and discovering creative ideas you won't find just anywhere, I hope you'll join me by subscribing. I have so many more projects and techniques I can't wait to share with you. Click the picture on the bottom right to see a playlist of some other mixed media tutorials that you're sure to love.